I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a single door. I just stood up from that table, buttoned my jacket, and walked out into the cold Ontario night like I had somewhere better to be. And honestly, I did. My name is Gerald Kowalski. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the city of Hamilton, raised 2 kids in a house I built with my own hands on a quarter-acre lot in Ancaster, and I genuinely believed, that a man who kept his word, paid his bills, and showed up every single day had earned a certain kind of life. I was wrong about that. Or maybe I was right about the life, but wrong about the woman I was living it with. Let me back up. I met my wife when I was 32. She was 29, working as an administrator at McMaster University. Her name was Diane Kowalski, née Fontaine, French-Canadian family from Sudbury, Catholic upbringing, the kind of woman who ironed her blouses and always brought a hostess gift to dinner parties. I thought I'd won the lottery. We got married in 1995 at St. Joseph's in Hamilton. 200 guests, open bar. Her mother, Marguerite, cried through the whole ceremony and told me afterwards that I was exactly the kind of man she'd prayed her daughter would find. Steady, reliable, a builder. I held on to that for 30 years. Our kids, our son Paul and our daughter Kathleen, grew up in that house in Ancaster. Paul played hockey. Kathleen did competitive swimming. I coached Paul's team for 4 seasons. I drove Kathleen to 6 a.m. practices every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 years without missing a single one. We took family vacations to Muskoka every August. We had a dog named Chester who ate one of my good work boots, and I never even got angry about it. From the outside, we were exactly what a family is supposed to look like. I think the problem was that I was so focused on building the structure of it that I stopped paying attention to what was happening inside the walls. Diane had always been social, more social than me, which wasn't hard. I'm an engineer. I'm comfortable with silence. I like solving problems with clear answers. She had her book club, her yoga friends, her volunteer work at the food bank on Dunsmore. I encouraged all of it. I thought a woman needed her own life outside the house. I still believe that. But somewhere around 2019, things shifted. Nothing I could point to directly. She started coming home later from book club. She got a new phone and kept it face down on the counter. She laughed differently, this new, kind of self-conscious laugh she hadn't had before. She started going to a gym in the west end of the city, even though there was a perfectly good one 8 minutes from our house. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was 60 years old. I'd gained 20 pounds since retirement, and I assumed whatever I was feeling was just the ordinary anxiety of a man watching his marriage age alongside him. I didn't want to be the husband who accused his wife of something based on a feeling. So I watched, and I waited, and I said nothing. The first concrete thing I noticed was the mileage on her car. She'd told me she was going to book club on a Thursday evening in November, third Thursday. Same as always, held at her friend Lorraine's place in Stony Creek, maybe a 20-minute drive from our house. She left at 7. She was back by 11. That's 4 hours for a 2-hour book club with a 20-minute drive each way. I didn't say anything. But the next morning, when she was in the shower, I checked the odometer against what I'd written down the week before. She'd driven 61 kilometers. Stony Creek and back is roughly 40. I wrote the number down in a small notebook I kept in my workshop. I dated it, and I started keeping track. Over the next 4 months, I filled 11 pages of that notebook. Mileage discrepancies. Timestamps that didn't add up. A receipt for dinner at a restaurant in Burlington that I found in the pocket of her coat when I was taking it to the dry cleaner. A receipt for 2 for a Thursday night when she'd told me she was working late on a fundraiser for the University Alumni Association. I still said nothing. I know that sounds strange. People ask me, when I tell this story, why I didn't just confront her. And the honest answer is that I needed to know the full shape of it before I said a word. I'm an engineer. You don't tear down a structure until you understand exactly what's holding it up and what will fall when it comes down. In February of this year, I hired a private investigator. His name was Terry, and he worked out of an office above a pharmacy on King Street East. I found him through a referral from a colleague who'd gone through something similar 8 years ago. Terry was former OPP, quiet, professional, and he charged me a flat fee for a 2-week surveillance period. He confirmed everything I already suspected, and then some. The man's name was Douglas. He was 55, divorced, no kids, worked as a sales director for a pharmaceutical company. He lived in a condo in Oakville. He drove a silver Audi. Terry showed me photographs. Diane and Douglas having dinner. Diane and Douglas walking along the waterfront in Burlington. Diane and Douglas in the parking lot of the gym in the West End, the one that was inexplicably so much better than the gym 8 minutes from our house. I sat in my workshop for a long time after Terry showed me those photographs. Chester had died 2 years earlier, and I was glad he wasn't there to see me like that. A 62-year-old man sitting on a workbench in his own garage at 11 o'clock at night, holding a manila envelope, trying to remember how to breathe. Then I put the envelope in my fireproof lockbox under the workbench, made myself a cup of tea, and went to bed. I had decided something. I wasn't going to act in anger. Anger is a terrible architect. It builds things quickly and badly, and they never hold. I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Priya Mehta. Family law, highly recommended, office in downtown Hamilton. I told her everything and gave her copies of Terry's report. She told me to keep documenting, to avoid moving any money or changing any accounts for the moment, and to be patient. She told me that the discovery phase was the most important part. I was patient. Lord knows I'd had practice. The next 2 months were the strangest of my life. I went to dinner with Diane. I watched television beside her in the evenings. I fixed the loose gutter on the north side of the house, and she thanked me. I acted exactly like a man who had no idea his marriage was already over, because I had decided that when it ended, it would end on my terms, at my timing, with everything in order. I want to be clear about something. I was not performing happiness. I was not pretending everything was fine. I was simply waiting. There is a difference between deception and discipline, and I was choosing discipline. Then Diane's mother called. Marguerite was turning 75 in June. She lived in a retirement community in Dundas, about 20 minutes from our house, the same community she'd moved into after Diane's father passed away 6 years ago. Marguerite and I had always gotten along reasonably well. She was a proud woman, a bit imperious, the kind of person who kept score of social debts without ever mentioning them. But she'd always treated me with basic respect, and I'd always been generous with her, helping with her move, driving her to medical appointments, covering a few expenses when she'd had a difficult year financially. The birthday dinner was to be held at a private room at a restaurant in Dundas on a Saturday evening in June. Diane organized everything. 22 guests, Marguerite's friends, a few of Diane's cousins, our kids, a couple of Marguerite's neighbors from the retirement community. I confirmed my attendance. I even offered to pick up Marguerite's sister Claudette from the airport, which I did, without complaint, on a Friday afternoon when I could have been doing something else. The evening of the dinner, Diane got ready early and left ahead of me, saying she needed to help her mother with a few things before guests arrived. I thought nothing of it. I drove to the restaurant alone, parked, walked in, and was shown to the private room. That's when I saw him. Douglas was sitting at the head of the table. I want you to understand what that means in context. This was a dinner for Marguerite's 75th birthday. I was her son-in-law of 28 years. I had driven her sister from the airport the day before. I had, over the course of those 28 years, helped pay for the retirement community she was currently living in, fixed her car twice, taken her grocery shopping during the winter months when she didn't like driving on ice, and given her a Waterford crystal vase for her 70th birthday that she still displayed prominently in her living room. And Douglas, a man I had never met, a man who had been sleeping with my wife for at least 8 months, a man whose last name I had only learned from a PI report 3 months ago, was sitting at the head of the table like he belonged there. Diane was beside him. She looked up when I walked in, and for a fraction of a second I saw something cross her face, not guilt, not embarrassment, but something almost like challenge, like she was waiting to see what I would do. Marguerite was at the other end of the table. She met my eyes briefly and then looked away. The other guests were doing what people do when they sense something is wrong and don't know how to address it. They were very deliberately not looking at me. I stood at the entrance of that room for about 4 seconds. Then I nodded. Once, to no one in particular. I walked back to the host stand, asked them to bring me the gift I'd left with them when I arrived, a small, framed photograph I'd had restored of Marguerite and her late husband on their wedding day, which I'd found in a box she'd left in our basement years ago and had quietly taken to a restoration shop in the spring, and I walked out of that restaurant and got back into my car. I drove home. I fed the cat we'd gotten after Chester, a bad-tempered tabby named Biscuit, who didn't particularly like me but tolerated my presence. I made myself a bowl of soup. I sat at the kitchen table, and I was entirely calm, which I think is the most accurate measure of how far past grief I had already traveled. My phone started ringing at 8:47. It was Diane. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 8:51, and again at 9:03, and again at 9:17, and 9:29, and 9:44. By 10:30, she had called me 41 times. By midnight, it was 53. By the time I went to bed at 12:15, it was 58 calls and 14 text messages. I read the text messages. They progressed in an interesting way. The first few were confused. Where did you go? Are you okay? Then they became explanatory. Douglas is just a friend. Mom invited him. I can explain. Then they became frustrated. Gerald, this is embarrassing. You're being a child. Then, somewhere around the 11th text, they became frightened. Not frightened for me. Frightened for herself. Please call me back. We need to talk before you do anything. That word, anything, told me she understood exactly where we stood. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone and went to sleep. The next morning, I called Priya. We had been preparing for this moment. I had, over the previous 2 months, quietly gathered every financial document I could access: tax returns, investment statements, the mortgage documents, records of contributions I'd made to Marguerite's care, Diane's benefit records from McMaster, everything. I had also, on Priya's advice, had our house independently appraised and opened a separate personal account at a different bank. Diane came home that Sunday afternoon. She walked into the kitchen where I was sitting with a cup of coffee and the newspaper, and she started to speak some version of an explanation I had already imagined, about how Douglas was just someone her mother had invited, how it wasn't what it looked like, how I had embarrassed her by leaving. I let her finish. Then I slid an envelope across the kitchen table. She looked at it. "What is this?" she said. "It's from my lawyer," I said. "Priya Mehta. Her contact information is on the card inside. You'll want to find your own representation fairly quickly, I think." Diane opened the envelope. She went pale. "Gerald, I've already made arrangements to stay with Paul for a few weeks," I said. "I think that's the cleanest way to handle the immediate situation. Biscuit needs to be fed twice a day. He prefers the pâté, not the flaked kind." She started crying. And I want to be honest about this, because I think honesty matters more than making myself look strong. Seeing her cry was not easy. 30 years is 30 years. There was a version of me that wanted to sit down and put my arms around her and find some other way through. That version of me had been very present for the past 4 months, and I had listened to him carefully, and I had decided, just as carefully, that he was talking about what was comfortable rather than what was right. I picked up my car keys from the hook by the door. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said. And I meant it, not bitterly, genuinely. I walked out. I stayed with Paul and his wife, Christine, in their house in Waterdown for 6 weeks. They were kind to me in the way adult children are kind to parents in crisis, careful, attentive, trying not to say too much. Kathleen called me every evening for the first 2 weeks. She was upset. She wanted explanations. She wanted someone to be more wrong than the other. She wanted the kind of resolution you can summarize in a sentence. I told her that the truth was complicated and that what mattered was that her mother and I both survived this with our dignity intact, and that she shouldn't have to choose sides. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. Ontario is a no-fault province, but the documentation we had made the division cleaner and more straightforward than it might otherwise have been. We kept things out of court. The house sold in the spring. I bought a condominium in Dundas, smaller, quieter, with a balcony where I can see the Niagara Escarpment on a clear day. I heard through Kathleen, about 4 months after Diane and I separated, that Douglas had stopped seeing Diane sometime in the autumn. I didn't ask for details, and Kathleen didn't offer many. I noticed that I felt almost nothing about this information, which told me something about how thoroughly I had already closed that chapter. Marguerite called me once, in November, about 3 months after the separation. She said she wanted to apologize. She said she had made a terrible mistake. She said she had always respected me, and that she had let herself get caught up in something she should have stopped. I listened to all of it. Then I told her that I appreciated the call, that I didn't hold lasting bitterness toward her, that I hoped she was well, and that I thought it was best if we didn't speak again. She said she understood. I still have the wedding day photograph I'd had restored. It was meant to be her birthday gift. I couldn't quite bring myself to throw it out, so it's in a box in my storage locker. Maybe one day I'll send it to Diane to pass along. Maybe not. Some things don't need resolution to stop mattering. I'm 63 years old. I wake up every morning in a quiet apartment with a bad-tempered cat who has grudgingly decided that I'm acceptable company. I drink my coffee on the balcony when the weather allows. I consult part-time for a small engineering firm that works on municipal infrastructure projects, which keeps my mind sharp without requiring me to be anywhere I don't want to be. Paul and Christine are expecting their first child in the spring, which means I'll be a grandfather, which I find I'm genuinely looking forward to. I get asked sometimes, by men my age who are going through something similar, what I wish I'd done differently, and the honest answer is, not much about the end. The end, I handled about as well as I could have. What I wish is that I'd paid closer attention earlier, not to catch anything, but just to actually be present, to ask more questions, to notice when the distance between two people starts to grow and address it as a problem worth solving rather than a fact worth accepting. Because here is what I know now, at 63, that I wish I'd understood at 45 or 50. A marriage is not a structure you build once and then walk away from. It's more like a garden. You can't plant it in 1995 and assume it will take care of itself. You have to keep showing up. You have to keep paying attention. And when you notice something is wrong, you have to be willing to say so, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you're afraid of what the answer might be. Silence is sometimes strength. But silence is also sometimes just fear wearing a stoic face. I carried a lot of things quietly for a long time. Some of that discipline served me. Some of it just delayed a conversation that needed to happen years before it did. If you're reading this and you recognize something of your own life in what I've described, the slow drift, the explanations you almost believe, the calendar discrepancies you tell yourself you're imagining, please don't wait as long as I did to pay attention. You deserve honesty. Your partner deserves honesty. And whatever the outcome of that honesty turns out to be, it is always, always better than the alternative. I took that walk out of a restaurant in Dundas on a June evening, and I never looked back. But I want to be clear. The walkout wasn't the moment I saved myself. The walkout was just the last step. The saving happened months earlier, quietly, in a workshop in Ancaster, when I decided that I was worth telling the truth to. That's the part I want you to remember.